Did the Titanic really sink, or was it swapped at the last minute with its sister ship, Olympic? Olympic was the first to set sail and actually had a very rocky start on its 5th voyage. It collided with a warship and needed extensive repairs.
The Britannic, built as the 3rd ship in the Olympic class by the White Star Line, was a colossal and remarkable ocean liner, initially intended to be even more luxurious and grand than its predecessor, the Titanic. The ship's design was almost identical to that of Titanic, but with some critical changes in an attempt to prevent another tragedy like the one that befell its infamous sister ship. The Titanic disaster had rocked the world in 1912, and the Britannic, constructed just a few years later, was supposed to be the White Star Line's redemption, a ship that would take luxury and safety to new heights. But the Britannic would meet a tragic fate of its own, one that unfolded in a completely different way, but was no less disastrous, in some ways even more so. While the Titanic's sinking became the most famous maritime disaster in history, the Britannic's story has largely remained in the shadow of its predecessor. For most, the sinking of the Titanic, with the catastrophic loss of over 1,500 lives, is the central event that defines the legacy of White Star's Olympic-class ships. But the Britannic's sinking, though less deadly, was a greater test of the ship's design and human decision-making under pressure. The Britannic was originally planned to be named the Gigantic, and it was envisioned as a state-of-the-art ocean liner that would carry the wealthy elite across the Atlantic in luxurious style. However, the Titanic disaster led to significant changes in the Britannic's design, including better safety features and a greater number of lifeboats to accommodate all passengers. The name was also changed to Britannic, likely to suggest humility following the grandiose expectations of the Titanic, and in a bid to distance itself from the tragic disaster. Despite these modifications, fate had other plans for the Britannic. Launched in 1914, it was quickly requisitioned by the British government as a hospital ship during World War I. The grandeur and opulence that were meant to define the Britannic as a symbol of peace and luxury were now overshadowed by the brutal realities of war. The Britannic's fate was no longer tied to passengers seeking leisure, but to wounded soldiers being transported across dangerous waters. The ship's most critical change was its conversion into a hospital vessel, where it provided life-saving services for soldiers injured in the conflict. Captain Charlie Bartlett, a highly experienced maritime officer who had already proven himself on the Titanic's sister ship, the Olympic, was given command of the Britannic during its wartime service. Under his leadership, the Britannic made multiple voyages to transport wounded soldiers from the battlefronts back to England. During these journeys, the ship was exposed to significant risks as it was sailing through dangerous war zones where enemy mines and submarines posed constant threats to its safety. On November 21st, 1916, while making another trip in the Aegean Sea to pick up more soldiers, the Britannic encountered its fateful moment. At 8:12 a.m., a violent explosion suddenly rocked the ship, creating an immense, devastating blast that sent shockwaves through the vessel.
Olympic's damaged propeller shaft was actually replaced with one that was originally intended for Titanic. These two ships were nearly identical with subtle differences. Reddit user BreezeMac pointed out inconsistencies in both ships' forward portholes.
The cause of the explosion has remained a mystery, though many historians speculate that the ship hit a German mine planted in the waters by enemy forces, and this is considered by many to be the most plausible explanation for the disaster. But the circumstances surrounding the explosion, the ship's response, and the subsequent decisions made in the minutes following the blast would set the stage for a different kind of catastrophe than the Titanic's. Captain Bartlett, in a calm and collected manner, immediately ordered the closure of the watertight doors, a feature that had been incorporated into the Britannic's design after the Titanic disaster in an effort to prevent a similar fate. But the damage was extensive. 6 compartments were flooded, more than what the Titanic had sustained. Even with these watertight compartments, the Britannic would have likely stayed afloat had it not been for 2 critical decisions made in the heat of the moment. The first error came when Captain Bartlett made the decision to try and run the Britannic aground on the nearby island of Kea. While this decision could have possibly saved the ship, it was complicated by an earlier choice made by the nursing staff to open the portholes to air out the ship's sick wards. This seemingly innocent action caused water to pour into the ship through the open portholes as the Britannic headed toward the island. The additional water compromised the ship's stability, making it difficult to prevent the flooding from spreading. The second critical error came when some members of the crew, in a panicked state, attempted to launch lifeboats without orders. Given that the ship was still moving at full speed, the lifeboats were sucked into the ship's massive propellers, tragically killing several people on board the lifeboats. This decision led to the deaths of several crew members and passengers, adding to the chaos and confusion that plagued the disaster. Less than 30 minutes after the explosion, Captain Bartlett came to the grim realization that the ship would sink, and he ordered the evacuation. By this time, the ship was already listing heavily, and the damage was too severe for any hopes of saving the Britannic. Despite the early panic and errors, the Britannic's evacuation was remarkably efficient, with 1,036 people being rescued from the sinking vessel. The lifeboats were launched, and most of the crew and passengers made it to safety. However, 30 lives were lost, many of them in those prematurely launched lifeboats, and the tragedy was compounded by the loss of life that could have been avoided had the evacuation been managed more calmly. The Britannic sank at 9:07 a.m., just 55 minutes after the explosion. It was a remarkably quick and devastating event. Even though many people survived, the loss of the ship was nonetheless significant. The ship was cut down by what was believed to be the mine explosion, but the disaster's toll in terms of lives was far less than the Titanic's, making it less remembered in popular culture. However, the mystery surrounding the explosion, the flawed decisions made by the crew, and the tragic loss of life left a mark on maritime history that was never fully understood. In 1975, ocean explorer Jacques Cousteau located the wreck of the Britannic on the seafloor of the Aegean Sea, lying at a depth of approximately 400 feet. The wreck was largely intact, and for the first time, researchers were able to get an up-close view of the ship's remains. Since then, the wreck has been explored further by modern explorers, and in 1996, Simon Mills, a British diver and researcher, acquired rights to explore the Britannic in greater detail. His decades of exploration and research have resulted in his book Inside the Britannic, which takes a forensic approach to the wreck, providing new insights into the mysteries of the sinking. Simon Mills' book offers an unparalleled glimpse into the intact wreck of the Britannic, with never-before-seen photographs and digital recreations of the ship's interiors, as well as detailed schematics that allow readers to see the ship as it once was. Mills' forensic work takes us through the wreck inch by inch, attempting to answer questions that have lingered for over a century. While the Titanic's sinking remains the most famous tragedy in maritime history, the Britannic's story is equally compelling, offering us a story of human error, survival, and tragic loss that has been all but forgotten in the shadow of the Titanic. So what caused the explosion that sank the Britannic? Was it really a mine? Or was there some other factor that played a role in the disaster? Could the ship have been saved with better decisions, and what can we learn from this tragedy about maritime safety and human nature? Mills' book provides some of the most in-depth exploration of these questions, and it's clear that the Britannic's legacy is not just about a shipwreck, but about the failures and triumphs of those involved in one of the most significant maritime disasters of the early 20th century. As we continue to explore the Britannic and its legacy, we are reminded that history is often more complicated than we think, and even the grandest ships with all their luxury and technological innovation can be undone by a single moment of tragedy.